The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows over the quiet streets of Oakwood, a suburban neighborhood where nothing much ever seemed to happen. Lucas Parker walked steadily along the familiar sidewalk, his German shepherd, Milo, trotting by his side. The sound of Milo's nails clicking against the pavement was oddly comforting. A steady rhythm that always helped Lucas clear his head after a long day at school. Lucas adjusted the strap of his backpack, which was loaded with schoolbooks, a few stray snacks, and his prized possession, a school-issued laptop that his dad always reminded him to protect. That thing cost a fortune. Lucas, Ethan Parker would often say, "You lose it, and you're walking to the library every day for the rest of the semester." Lucas had rolled his eyes at his dad's nagging more times than he could count. But deep down, he knew Ethan was right. The laptop wasn't just a tool for school. It was also his connection to his friends and the endless YouTube videos he loved watching with Milo curled up beside him. The street was unusually empty for this time of day. No cars passed by, no neighbors worked on their lawns, and even the distant hum of construction from the new housing development had gone quiet. It was just him, Milo, and the faint rustling of leaves in the soft breeze. Milo suddenly stopped, his ears perking up as he sniffed the air. "What's up, boy?" Lucas asked, tugging gently on the leash. "Smell something?" Milo growled low in his throat, a sound Lucas had only heard a handful of times. It was a warning, a sound Milo made when something, or someone, didn't sit right with him. Lucas turned around quickly, his heart skipping a beat. At first, he didn't see anything, just the stretch of empty sidewalk and rows of houses basking in the evening light. He frowned, his pulse quickening. Milo wasn't the type to overreact. "Relax," Lucas murmured, giving Milo a reassuring pat. "Probably just a squirrel or something." Milo remained tense, his sharp eyes fixed on something Lucas couldn't see. Still, after a moment, he relaxed and began walking again, though his tail was low and his ears remained alert. Unbeknownst to Lucas, a pair of watchful eyes tracked his every movement from behind a parked car. Derek Hart leaned against the side of a fence, partially hidden by the shadow of an overgrown tree. His grimy jacket was unzipped, revealing a threadbare shirt underneath. His sharp gaze lingered on Lucas's backpack. It looked sturdy, the kind of bag that carried something worth taking. A sly grin spread across Derek's face. "Nice bag, kid," he muttered under his breath. Lucas continued walking, oblivious to the threat lurking just beyond his line of sight. The comforting quiet of the street was now an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. He turned down a narrower side street lined with oak trees that arched overhead, their branches forming a canopy that cast deep shadows over the pavement. Milo growled again, sharper this time. Lucas stopped, his own unease growing. "What now, boy?" he whispered. Milo's eyes were locked on a parked car just behind them. Lucas turned quickly, his stomach twisting with nerves. He still didn't see anything, but the feeling of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. He pulled Milo closer and quickened his pace, deciding he'd feel safer once he got home. Derek, however, wasn't about to let his opportunity slip away. Moving with deliberate steps, he crept along the edge of the sidewalk, keeping just out of sight. The kid was distracted. Perfect. As Lucas rounded another corner, Derek stepped out from behind a tree, blocking the sidewalk. Lucas froze mid-step, his grip on Milo's leash tightening as his eyes met Derek's. The man's crooked grin sent a chill down his spine. "Afternoon," Derek said, his voice smooth and casual, but with an edge that made Lucas's stomach twist. Lucas swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you want?" Derek tilted his head, his grin widening. "Relax, kid, I'm just out for a walk. Same as you." Milo growled fiercely, his body tense as he stepped protectively in front of Lucas. For the first time, Lucas noticed how dirty the man's jacket was, the smudges of grease on his hands, and the sharp, almost hungry look in his eyes. Derek gestured lazily at Lucas's backpack. "That's a nice bag you got there. Bet it's got something good in it. Why don't you hand it over?" Lucas's chest tightened. He took a step back, shaking his head. "No, it's mine." Derek's grin disappeared, replaced by an irritated scowl. "Don't make this hard, kid. Just give it to me, and I'll be on my way." Lucas's heart raced as he clutched the strap of his backpack. He tried to sound braver than he felt. "Leave us alone, or I'll call the police." Derek chuckled, the sound harsh and mocking. "The police? You think they care? They won't do anything for some kid and his dog." Before Lucas could react, Derek lunged forward, grabbing the strap of the backpack. Milo exploded into action, barking and snapping as he lunged at Derek's leg. "Get back, you stupid mutt," Derek shouted, stumbling backward as Milo's teeth came within inches of his ankle. He cursed loudly, trying to shake off the dog's relentless attack. "Milo, stop," Lucas shouted, panic rising in his voice. But Milo wasn't backing down. The dog's ferocity gave Lucas just enough time to yank the backpack out of Derek's grip. Derek stumbled back, glaring at Lucas with fury in his eyes. "You're gonna regret this, kid," he spat before turning and bolting down the street. Milo barked furiously, straining at the leash as if he wanted to give chase. Lucas held him back, his hands trembling. His heart pounded in his ears as he watched Derek disappear around the corner. For a long moment, the street was silent except for Milo's low growl. Lucas knelt down, burying his face in the dog's fur. "Good boy," he whispered shakily. "Good boy." Milo licked Lucas's cheek, his tail wagging faintly, but the unease in the air remained. And Lucas knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. Lucas sat on the living room couch. Milo curled up at his feet, his tail wagging softly against the floor. The familiar warmth of the house should have comforted him, but the adrenaline from the encounter with Derek still coursed through his veins. His scraped palms stung where he'd gripped Milo's leash too tightly during the struggle. And the memory of Derek's snarling face refused to leave his mind. Ethan Parker entered the room, his work clothes slightly rumpled, a deep crease on his forehead as he held his phone to his ear. He glanced at Lucas, his expression shifting from mild concern to sharp focus when he saw the way Lucas sat. Shoulders tense, eyes distant. "Yeah, I'll call you back," Ethan said into the phone before hanging up. He moved to stand in front of Lucas, arms crossed. "What happened?" Lucas hesitated, his fingers brushing over Milo's fur. "It was nothing," he mumbled. "Just something weird on the way home." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "Weird, huh? You've got that look. The one you had when you got in trouble for breaking the neighbor's window." "I didn't do anything wrong," Lucas protested, sitting up straighter. "Then tell me what happened." Lucas sighed, his fingers tightening on the leash still looped around his wrist. "Some guy followed me. He tried to take my backpack. But Milo scared him off." Ethan's jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed. "He tried to take your bag?" "Lucas, that's serious. Did you recognize him?" "No," Lucas admitted, "but he didn't seem normal. He said nobody would care if I called the police." Ethan knelt in front of his son, his hands resting firmly on Lucas's knees. "You listen to me, Lucas. What happened out there wasn't your fault. People like that think they can take what they want because no one will stand up to them. But you didn't let him win." Lucas looked away, a lump forming in his throat. "I didn't do anything. Milo did." Ethan's expression softened. "You didn't let him take the bag. You stood up for yourself. That's doing something." He paused, glancing at Milo, who wagged his tail as if sensing the praise. "And Milo, well, he's part of the family. He's got your back, always." Lucas nodded slowly, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "What do we do now?" Ethan stood, his voice firm. "We report this. We're not letting it slide." Lucas hesitated, but he said the police wouldn't care. "What if he's right?" Ethan's face hardened. "Then we make them care." The Oakwood Police Department was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of voices filling the air. Lucas sat in a stiff plastic chair near the front desk. Clutching his backpack, Ethan leaned against the counter, speaking with the officer on duty, a tired-looking man with thinning hair and a nameplate that read Sergeant Malone. Malone listened as Ethan recounted what had happened, his expression neutral. He scribbled a few notes into a worn notebook, occasionally glancing at Lucas. "So," Malone said finally, looking up, "your son was approached by a man who tried to take his backpack." "Not tried. He did take it," Ethan corrected. "Milo chased him off, and Lucas got it back." Malone's lips twitched faintly, almost a smirk. "Sounds like you've got a real guard dog there." "He's not just a guard dog," Ethan snapped, his voice sharp. "That guy wasn't just some petty thief. He followed my son, threatened him. He wasn't afraid of getting caught. Malone held up a hand, his tone placating. I get it, we'll file a report, but without more to go on, a name, a better description, it's tough to track someone like that down. Ethan's jaw tightened. He's out there. He'll do this again. Is that what you're waiting for? Malone sighed, scribbling more notes. We'll keep an eye out. Mr. Parker, I'll circulate the description, but unless he shows up again or someone identifies him, there's not much we can do. Ethan exhaled sharply, clearly dissatisfied. Fine, but if something else happens, you'll be hearing from me again. Lucas followed his dad out of the station, Milo trotting at their side. The cold night air stung Lucas's cheeks, but it wasn't enough to chase away the heavy feeling settling over him. They're not going to do anything, are they? Lucas asked quietly. Ethan shook his head, his expression grim. Not yet, but that doesn't mean we stop. This guy made a mistake when he messed with you. Lucas frowned, glancing down at Milo. What if he comes back? Ethan stopped, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. Then we'll be ready. You're not alone in this. Lucas woke to the sound of Milo barking downstairs. He rushed out of bed, still groggy, and found Ethan standing by the front window, holding back the curtain with one hand while Milo growled lowly at his side. What's going on? Lucas asked, his heart thudding. Ethan didn't look away from the window. Nothing yet, but I don't trust that guy to just walk away. Lucas moved closer, peering out into the quiet street. It was empty, but the sight of the corner where Derek had disappeared the day before sent a shiver down his spine. I want to come with you and Milo today, Ethan said, his voice firm. If he's still around, I don't want you walking alone. Lucas hesitated, then nodded. Okay. As they left the house later that morning, Lucas felt a new sense of purpose. With his dad by his side and Milo at his feet, he wasn't just waiting for Derek to strike again. He was ready to face him. The neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, the soft chirping of birds the only sound as they walked. But Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that Derek was out there, watching, waiting. Ethan's voice broke the silence. People like him think they're invisible, that no one's watching, but that's how they slip up. And when they do, we'll be there. Lucas nodded, his grip tightening on Milo's leash. He didn't know how this would end, but he wasn't going to back down. The sun shone brightly over Oakwood, casting long shadows along the sidewalks as Lucas, Ethan, and Milo walked through the quiet neighborhood. The air felt heavy with unspoken tension, as though the world was holding its breath. Lucas's eyes darted nervously from house to house, scanning for any sign of Derek. Ethan had brought along a small notebook and a pen, ready to jot down anything unusual. His expression was calm, but Lucas could sense the sharp focus in his father's movements. Milo, ever vigilant, walked slightly ahead, his nose twitching as he sniffed the ground. Stay sharp, Ethan said quietly. He might not be close, but someone like him doesn't just disappear. Lucas nodded, tightening his grip on the leash. What are we even looking for? Patterns, Ethan replied. Places he might be hiding. Signs he's been through here. They rounded a corner onto a quieter street, lined with older houses, paint peeled from weathered shutters, and untended lawns gave the area an eerie stillness. Lucas's stomach churned as they approached an empty lot at the end of the block. The same lot where he'd lost sight of Derek the day before. Let's start here, Ethan said, gesturing toward the lot. Milo perked up immediately, pulling slightly on the leash as if he sensed something. The lot was overgrown with weeds and strewn with debris. Rusted metal pieces jutted out from the grass, and a faint smell of oil lingered in the air. Ethan knelt beside a cluster of footprints in the dirt, studying them carefully. These are fresh, he muttered, and deep. Someone's been walking through here. Lucas crouched beside him, his eyes scanning the ground. Could it be him? Could be, Ethan said, standing up and dusting off his hands. It's a start. Milo barked suddenly, his ears perking up as he sniffed the air. He darted toward a pile of wood stacked haphazardly near the edge of the lot. Lucas followed quickly, his heart pounding. What is it, boy? Lucas asked, crouching down beside the dog. Milo's nose pressed against something tucked under the woodpile. Lucas reached out cautiously, pulling away a small object covered in dirt. It was a crumpled pack of cigarettes, the same brand Derek had been smoking during their encounter. Lucas held it up, his fingers trembling slightly. Dad, he called, showing Ethan the pack. Is this? Ethan took it, inspecting it closely. Could be. If it's his, it means he's been here. Probably hiding out after yesterday. A low growl from Milo drew their attention. The dog was standing stiffly now. His gaze locked on a shadowy alleyway that cut through the block. Lucas followed Milo's line of sight, his stomach twisting. Do you think he's still here? Lucas whispered. Ethan placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. Maybe, but we're not rushing in blind. Come on, let's get back and call this in. Back home, the tension was palpable as Ethan called the Oakwood Police Department. Lucas paced in the living room, Milo watching him with curious eyes. Every minute felt like an hour as they waited for an officer to arrive. When Sergeant Malone finally showed up, his expression was the same as before, tired and indifferent. He listened as Ethan explained what they'd found in the lot, taking notes on a clipboard. So, you think this guy's been hiding out there? Malone asked, raising an eyebrow. It's more than a hunch. Ethan replied, his voice steady. The footprints, the cigarette pack, it's all fresh. Malone sighed, tucking his clipboard under his arm. We'll send someone to check it out. But unless we catch him in the act, there's not much we can do. Ethan's jaw tightened, his frustration evident. This guy is a threat. Malone, he followed my son. He's not just going to stop. Malone shrugged. I hear you, but it's not that simple. We'll keep an eye on the area. But for now, my hands are tied. As the sergeant left, Lucas slumped onto the couch, anger and helplessness bubbling inside him. Why won't they take this seriously? He muttered. Ethan sat beside him, his expression calm but resolute. Because they think they don't have to. But that doesn't mean we stop. We keep watching, keep pushing. If they won't act, we'll make sure they have no choice. Lucas nodded, his determination growing. We'll catch him. Ethan smiled faintly. That's the spirit. People like him always slip up. Lucas, we just have to be ready. The next day, Ethan and Lucas returned to the lot with Milo, determined to uncover more. The morning air was crisp, the neighborhood quiet as they retraced their steps from the day before. As they approached the alley where Milo had growled, Lucas spotted something glinting faintly in the sunlight. He pointed it out to Ethan, who knelt down to investigate. It was a keychain, scratched and worn, with a single rusted key dangling from it. Ethan held it up, his brow furrowing. This could belong to him. Ethan said, if it does, it's another clue. Lucas frowned. Do you think he'll come back for it? Ethan stood, pocketing the keychain. If he's smart, he won't. But people like him, they're not always smart. Milo barked sharply, his tail wagging as he sniffed the air again. Lucas followed his gaze, his heart racing. At the far end of the alley, a shadow moved. Dad, Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. I think that's him. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he turned to look. The figure was already disappearing around the corner, moving quickly. Let's go, Ethan said, his voice firm. Stay close. Lucas tightened his grip on Milo's leash, adrenaline surging through him as they hurried after the shadowy figure. The air was electric as Lucas, Ethan, and Milo pursued the shadowy figure down the alley. Lucas's heart raced as he struggled to keep up with Ethan's long strides. Milo pulled hard on the leash, his growls low and determined, leading them like a bloodhound on the scent. Stay focused, Ethan called over his shoulder. He's trying to lose us. Lucas nodded, his breaths coming in sharp bursts. The narrow alley gave way to a backstreet lined with abandoned buildings and overgrown lots. The figure ahead darted behind a crumbling brick wall, disappearing from view. He's heading toward the old warehouse, Ethan said, his voice edged with urgency. Keep Milo close. We don't know what we're walking into. The thought sent a chill through Lucas, but he tightened his grip on the leash and pushed forward. The warehouse loomed ahead, its faded sign barely legible and its windows broken. The figure slipped inside through a jagged opening in the wall, disappearing into the shadows. The musty smell of mildew and rust hit Lucas as they stepped inside. Dust particles floated in the dim shafts of light that pierced through the broken roof. Milo's growls grew louder as he sniffed the ground, his tail stiff and his ears alert. Stay close, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. If he's in here, we can't give him a chance to double back. They moved slowly, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of grime on the floor. Milo tugged the leash, leading them deeper into the maze of rusted machinery and forgotten crates. Every creak and groan of the old building set Lucas's nerves on edge. Then they heard it, a faint shuffle. The scrape of a shoe against concrete. "He's here," Ethan said, his voice barely more than a breath. He gestured for Lucas to stop and knelt beside Milo, holding the dog steady. "We've got him cornered." From behind a stack of wooden crates, Derek emerged. His face was flushed, and his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. He clutched Lucas's backpack tightly to his chest, his knuckles white against the straps. "Stay back," Derek barked, his voice cracking with panic. "You don't want to do this." Ethan straightened, his calm and commanding presence filling the space. "It's over, Derek. Hand over the bag, and maybe we can work this out." Derek laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You think I'm scared of you? You think I don't know how this ends? Cops don't care about you or your kid." Lucas felt a surge of anger at Derek's words, but Ethan held up a hand to keep him from stepping forward. "This isn't about what you think," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's about what you've done. Stealing from a kid, intimidating him. That doesn't just go away." Derek sneered. "You think I'm just going to give this up and go quietly?" Ethan nodded toward Milo, whose growl had turned into a low, menacing snarl. "You don't have much of a choice." Milo suddenly lunged forward, pulling hard against the leash. Lucas barely managed to hold him back as Derek flinched, stumbling into the crates behind him. The backpack slipped from his grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. "Call off the dog," Derek shouted, his voice rising in fear. "Fine, take it." Ethan moved swiftly, grabbing the backpack and passing it to Lucas. "You made a mistake, Derek," Ethan said firmly, "but it ends here." Derek glared at them, his chest heaving. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're messing with." "We're done talking," Ethan said, pulling out his phone. "Lucas, take Milo and step back." Lucas obeyed, retreating toward the warehouse entrance with Milo still growling at his side. He watched as Ethan calmly called the police, keeping one eye on Derek the entire time. Minutes felt like hours as they waited for the police to arrive. Derek paced nervously, his gaze flicking toward the exits but finding no opportunity to escape. Milo stayed alert, his sharp eyes never leaving Derek's movements. When the sound of sirens finally echoed through the warehouse, Derek let out a defeated groan. "Great, just great," he muttered, slumping against the crates. Two officers entered cautiously, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. Ethan raised a hand in greeting. "He's over there." Tried to run but didn't get far. The officers approached Derek, who raised his hands in mock surrender. All right," he muttered. "No need to get rough." As they cuffed Derek and led him toward the exit, one of the officers paused to address Ethan and Lucas. "You two did good. Most people wouldn't have gone this far. We couldn't let it slide." Ethan replied, "Not when someone's trying to scare my son." The officer nodded, his expression serious. "We'll make sure this goes on record. He won't be walking away from this." As the police car pulled away, taking Derek with it, Lucas felt a wave of relief wash over him. He looked up at Ethan, who rested a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Ethan asked. Lucas nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." "You did great," Ethan said, his voice full of pride. "You stood your ground." Milo barked once, wagging his tail as if to echo Ethan's sentiment. Lucas smiled, crouching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Thanks, Milo," Lucas whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ethan chuckled. "Come on, let's get you and Milo home. You've earned some rest." As they walked back through the quiet streets of Oakwood, Lucas felt a new sense of confidence building inside him. They had faced down the fear, the doubt, and the danger, and they had won. But Lucas knew this was just the beginning. They still had to make sure Derek faced justice, and he was ready for whatever came next. The days following Derek's arrest were a whirlwind. Lucas and Ethan returned home from the warehouse that night exhausted but resolved to ensure that Derek faced real consequences. Milo, having done his part, sprawled out on his favorite rug, his tail wagging lazily as if he already knew he was the hero of the hour. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, speaking with Detective Carter, who had been assigned to the case. Lucas sat nearby, staring at his retrieved backpack, now slightly scuffed but still intact. Inside, his school laptop rested safely, a silent reminder of everything they had fought to recover. "Understood, Detective," Ethan said into the phone. "We'll be ready to give statements whenever you need us." He hung. Lucas nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. "I can do that," he said quietly, glancing at Milo, who lifted his head as if to offer silent encouragement. The next morning, Ethan drove Lucas to the police station. Detective Carter greeted them with a firm handshake and led them to a small interview room. Lucas felt a flutter of nerves as he sat down, but Ethan's reassuring presence calmed him. "All right, Lucas," Carter said, flipping open his notebook. "Just take your time and walk me through what happened." Lucas took a deep breath and began recounting the events of that day, the quiet walk home, Milo's early warning, Derek's taunts and threats, and the struggle that ended with Derek taking his backpack. He described how he and Ethan had tracked Derek down, Milo's role in cornering him, and how they had recovered the stolen bag. Carter listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When Lucas finished, Carter leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's a solid account," he said, "and Milo sounds like quite the dog." Lucas smiled faintly. "He is." Carter nodded, then looked at Ethan. "We've got a good chance of making this stick, especially with the stolen property and Derek's prior record. But it's important we're thorough. Lucas, if this goes to court, you may need to testify. Are you ready for that?" Lucas hesitated, then glanced at Ethan. His dad gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Yeah," Lucas said, his voice steady. "I'm ready." Later that evening, Lucas sat on the back porch, Milo at his side. The weight of the day lingered in his chest as he watched the sun dip below the horizon. He reached down to scratch Milo's ears, finding comfort in the dog's steady presence. "You think we'll win, boy?" Lucas asked softly. Milo wagged his tail in response, his eyes full of quiet assurance. Ethan stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. He handed one to Lucas and sat beside him, letting the silence settle before speaking. "You're thinking about what Carter said, aren't you?" Ethan asked. Lucas nodded. "What if it goes to court and Derek lies about everything? What if they believe him?" Ethan took a sip of his lemonade, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The truth has a way of coming out. Lucas, you've got the evidence, the witnesses, and your story. Derek can try to twist things, but he can't hide what he did." Lucas frowned, swirling his drink. "What if he gets away with it?" Ethan turned to him, his voice calm but firm. "Then we keep fighting. But I don't think that's going to happen. You've already shown more courage than most people ever do. That counts for something." Milo let out a soft bark, as if to agree. Lucas smiled despite himself, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly. "And thanks, Milo." A few days later, a letter arrived from the district attorney's office. Ethan opened it at the kitchen table while Lucas and Milo watched anxiously. As Ethan read, a small smile broke across his face. "What is it?" Lucas asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "They're moving forward with charges," Ethan said. "Derek's being charged with theft, intimidation of a minor, and resisting arrest." Lucas's eyes widened. "So, this is really happening?" Ethan nodded. "It's happening, and now we make sure it sticks." As the court date drew closer, Lucas spent his evenings going over his statement with Ethan. Milo sat nearby, his sharp eyes watching as if he understood the importance of what was happening. Each retelling made Lucas feel more confident, his voice steadier and his words clearer. One evening, Ethan handed Lucas a printed sheet of questions that Carter had suggested the prosecutor might ask during the trial. "These are just examples," Ethan said, "but it's good to be prepared." Lucas read through the questions, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. "I can do this," he said, more to himself than to Ethan. Ethan smiled, his pride evident. "I know you can." The night before the trial, Lucas lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Milo lay curled at his feet, his steady breathing a comforting presence. Lucas thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the anger, and the moments of doubt. But he also thought about Milo's courage, Ethan's unwavering support, and the determination that had brought them this far. "This is it, boy," Lucas whispered, reaching down to pat Milo's head. "Tomorrow, we finish this." Milo thumped his tail against the bed in agreement, and Lucas closed his eyes, letting sleep take him. The morning of the trial was brisk and clear, the kind of day Lucas would normally enjoy walking Milo through the neighborhood. But today, the courthouse loomed ahead, tall and imposing. Lucas and Ethan climbed the steps together. Milo left at home to rest. The absence of his loyal companion made Lucas feel slightly off balance. But his father's steady presence kept him grounded. "You ready, son?" Ethan asked as they reached the doors. Lucas nodded, his hands gripping the straps of his backpack tightly. "Yeah, I'm ready." Inside, the courthouse buzzed with low voices and hurried movements. The cold marble floors and high ceilings made everything feel larger, more significant. Lucas followed Ethan to a waiting area outside the courtroom, where Detective Carter met them. "Glad to see you both here," Carter said, shaking Ethan's hand and giving Lucas a reassuring nod. The prosecutor's confident. "Your testimony is the key." Lucas swallowed, the words settling heavily in his chest. "I'll do my best." Carter smiled faintly. "That's all anyone can ask." When the bailiff called Lucas's name, his stomach twisted into knots. He stood, his legs feeling like jelly, and walked to the front of the courtroom. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Ramos, gave him a small, encouraging smile as he sat down in the witness chair. "State your name for the record," the judge said, her tone calm but firm. "Lucas Harper," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling under the surface. Ms. Ramos approached the stand, her posture confident. "Lucas, can you tell us what happened on the day of the incident?" Lucas took a deep breath and began recounting everything: the walk home, Milo's warning growl, Derek's taunts and threats, and the moment Derek ripped the backpack away. As he spoke, his confidence grew, the words flowing naturally. "And what was in the backpack?" Ms. Ramos asked. "My school laptop," Lucas replied. "It's how I do my assignments. My dad told me to be careful with it because it's expensive." Ms. Ramos nodded, her expression serious. "And did the defendant, Derek, say anything to you during the encounter?" Lucas hesitated for a moment, then answered. "He said no one would care. That I should just give him the bag and let it go." The words hung in the air, the weight of them palpable. Ms. Ramos let the silence linger for a moment before speaking again. "Thank you, Lucas. No further questions." The defense attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood and adjusted his tie as he approached Lucas. His smile was polite, but Lucas could sense the edge behind it. "Lucas," the man began, his tone measured, "you've described Derek following you and threatening you. Are you absolutely certain it was him?" "Yes," Lucas replied firmly. "And your dog, Milo, played a significant role in tracking him down. Isn't it possible Milo might have been mistaken about who to chase?" Lucas frowned, his confidence unwavering. "No, Milo isn't wrong about people. He knew it was Derek." There was a faint chuckle from someone in the jury, and the defense attorney's face tightened. He cleared his throat. "And you say Derek threatened you? But couldn't his words have been taken out of context? Maybe he didn't mean them the way you interpreted." Lucas met the attorney's gaze, his voice steady. "He said no one would care. He meant to scare me. And he took my bag. There's no other way to take that." The attorney hesitated, his confidence faltering, then stepped back. "No further questions." Lucas exhaled as he returned to his seat, Ethan giving him a proud nod. "You did great," his father whispered. The trial progressed, with the prosecutor presenting evidence, the stolen laptop, the photos of the scuffle, and testimony from the officers who arrested Derek. Ms. Ramos tied everything together with sharp precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said in her closing statement, "this case is about accountability. The defendant didn't just steal a backpack, he targeted a child, used intimidation, and thought he could get away with it. But Lucas Harper stood up for himself. And today, we ask you to do the same. Hold Derek accountable." The defense attorney's closing argument was less confident. He tried to paint Derek's actions as impulsive and his words as misunderstood. But the jury's expressions remained unreadable. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Lucas sat beside Ethan, his heart pounding as the foreman handed a piece of paper to the judge. The room fell silent. "In the case of the state versus Derek Campbell," the judge began, her voice clear, "we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of theft, intimidation of a minor, and resisting arrest." A wave of relief washed over Lucas. Ethan placed a firm hand on his shoulder, pride evident in his expression. Derek slumped in his chair, his bravado completely gone as the reality of the verdict sank in. The judge's gavel struck the bench. Sentencing will be scheduled at a later date. Court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, The air felt lighter. Lucas and Ethan walked down the steps, their steps steady and sure. Detective Carter met them near the bottom, his expression pleased. "Good work today," Carter said. "You both made this happen." Lucas glanced at his dad, then back at Carter. "We couldn't have done it without you." As they reached the car, Milo greeted them with an excited bark from the backseat. Lucas laughed, scratching the dog's ears. "You're the real hero, boy." Ethan smiled, starting the car. "Let's go home. I think Milo's earned another steak dinner." As they drove away, Lucas felt a sense of closure. Derek's words, "No one will care," had been proven wrong. Justice had been served, and Lucas had reclaimed not just his belongings, but his confidence. For the first time in weeks, everything felt right. The days following the trial were quieter than Lucas expected. He still walked Milo through the neighborhood every afternoon, but the weight that had pressed on him since the incident was gone. The familiar streets didn't feel so threatening anymore, and he noticed neighbors smiling or waving more often. "You've been through a lot," Ethan said one evening as they sat on the porch. "But you handled it with courage. Son, not everyone would have done what you did." Lucas nodded, his gaze on Milo, who was lazily chewing on a toy by his feet. "I didn't feel brave most of the time. I just didn't want him to get away with it." "That's what bravery is," Ethan said with a small smile. "It's doing what's right, even when it's scary." News of the trial and Lucas's role in Derek's arrest had spread through the neighborhood. People began stopping by the house to offer words of encouragement. "Your boy did good," said Mrs. Grant from 2 doors down, her silver hair shining in the sunlight. "That man's been a menace for years. Maybe now we'll all feel a bit safer." Lucas felt a swell of pride hearing those words. For so long, he'd felt alone in what happened, but now he saw how much it mattered to others too. Milo, of course, became something of a local celebrity. During their walks, kids would come up to pet him, calling him the hero dog. "You're famous, buddy," Lucas said one afternoon as Milo wagged his tail happily at a group of children. A reporter even stopped by the house, asking for an interview about Milo's role in the case. Ethan politely declined, but Lucas couldn't help but laugh at the idea of Milo on the evening news. "I think he'd love the attention," Lucas joked, "as long as there are treats involved." While life was returning to normal, Lucas couldn't forget what Derek had said during the trial. "You'll regret this." The words echoed in his mind sometimes, like a faint shadow in the back of his thoughts. "What if he tries to come after us?" Lucas asked Ethan one night. Ethan's face grew serious, but his voice was steady. "Derek's going to be in prison for a while, and if he ever steps out of line again, we'll deal with it together." Lucas nodded, comforted by his father's calm confidence. As weeks turned into months, Lucas noticed changes in himself. He felt stronger, more assured in the way he carried himself. His teachers noticed too, commenting on how much more engaged he was in class. "You've been doing great work, Lucas," his English teacher said one day. "It's like you found your voice." Lucas smiled at that. In a way, he had. Standing up to Derek, testifying in court, it had shown him that his voice mattered. The experience had also brought Lucas and Ethan closer. They spent more time together, whether it was working on projects around the house or just talking on the porch after dinner. Milo was always nearby, a loyal presence that grounded them both. "You know, you remind me of your mom," Ethan said one evening, his tone wistful. Lucas looked up, surprised. "Really? She always stood up for what was right," Ethan said with a soft smile. "She'd be proud of you." Lucas felt a lump in his throat but managed a smile. "Thanks, Dad." One afternoon, Lucas and Ethan took Milo to the park. The sun was warm, and the grass was dotted with kids playing and families picnicking. Lucas threw a stick, and Milo sprinted after it, barking happily. As he watched Milo run, Lucas felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. The fear and anger that had consumed him after the robbery were gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Lucas said, glancing at his dad. Ethan smiled, resting a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "We already are, son." Milo bounded back with the stick, dropping it at Lucas's feet and wagging his tail. Lucas laughed, picking it up and throwing it again. As the sun began to set, casting the park in a golden glow, Lucas felt ready for whatever came next. He'd faced fear, fought for justice, and come out stronger. With Milo by his side and his father's unwavering support, he knew he could handle anything. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt bright. With the trial behind them, Lucas found himself thinking more about the future. He'd always gone through life quietly, blending into the background at school and in the neighborhood. But now, he realized he had the strength to stand out when it mattered. One day after school, Lucas stayed behind to talk to his English teacher, Ms. Harmon. She was organizing a workshop for students to write about personal challenges and how they overcame them. "You should join, Lucas," Ms. Harmon said, her warm smile encouraging. "You have an important story to tell." Lucas hesitated. The idea of sharing his experience with others was intimidating. But Ms. Harmon's words stuck with him. That evening, he mentioned it to Ethan. "Do you think it's a good idea?" Ethan set down the newspaper he'd been reading and looked at Lucas thoughtfully. "I think it's a great idea. You've got a story that could inspire others." With his dad's encouragement, Lucas decided to join the workshop. Over the next few weeks, Lucas poured his thoughts onto paper. He wrote about the day Derek followed him, the fear he'd felt, and the courage he found with Milo and his dad by his side. As he wrote, the memories didn't feel as heavy. Instead, they felt like something he could control. When it was time to share his story with the workshop group, Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he stood at the podium. But as he began to read, he felt the tension ease. The room was quiet, every eye on him, but this time, he didn't feel judged, he felt heard. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before the room erupted in applause. Ms. Harmon approached him afterward, beaming. "You did wonderfully, Lucas. You've got a gift." For the first time, Lucas believed her. A few weeks later, Ms. Harmon approached Lucas with an idea. "There's a community event coming up at the library," she said. "They're looking for local speakers to talk about overcoming challenges. I think you'd be perfect." Lucas's first instinct was to say no. The thought of standing in front of a larger crowd was daunting. But he remembered how good it had felt to share his story in the workshop. "I'll do it," he said, surprising himself. The day of the event arrived, and Lucas stood nervously backstage, clutching his notes. Ethan was in the front row, Milo at his side with a special, service dog, vest that allowed him to attend. Seeing them calmed Lucas's nerves. When his name was called, Lucas stepped onto the stage, the bright lights making it hard to see the audience. He took a deep breath and began. He spoke about the incident with Derek, the fear he'd felt, and the strength he'd discovered in himself and his family. He talked about Milo's courage and his father's unwavering support. As he spoke, the fear melted away, replaced by a sense of purpose. When he finished, the applause was louder than he'd ever imagined. He saw Ethan standing, clapping proudly, and even Milo barked once as if to cheer him on. After the event, several people approached Lucas to thank him for sharing his story. One woman said, "My son's been struggling with bullies at school. Hearing you talk about standing up for yourself, it gives me hope for him." Lucas smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't known before. His story mattered, and it was helping others. As the months passed, Lucas continued to grow. He became more involved in his community, speaking at events and writing about his experiences. Milo was always by his side, his loyal companion and biggest supporter. Ethan watched proudly as his son blossomed. "You found your voice, Lucas," he said one evening, "and you're using it to make a difference." Lucas nodded, looking down at Milo. "I couldn't have done it without you and Milo." One sunny afternoon, Lucas and Ethan took Milo to the park. They watched as Milo chased a stick, his tail wagging furiously. Lucas turned to his dad, a content smile on his face. "I feel like things are finally falling into place," Lucas said. Ethan nodded. "That's because you worked for it. Son, you faced something hard, and you didn't let it break you. That's what life's about." Lucas watched Milo sprint back toward them, the stick clutched triumphantly in his mouth. As the dog dropped the stick at his feet, Lucas reached down to pat his head. "We've come a long way, haven't we, boy?" Lucas said with a grin. Milo barked, his eyes bright with happiness. As they walked home, the sun dipping low on the horizon, Lucas felt a sense of peace and purpose. He'd faced his fears, found his voice, and discovered the strength within himself to make a difference. The future stretched out before him, full of possibility, and for the first time, Lucas felt ready to embrace it fully. With Milo at his side and Ethan's unwavering support, Lucas knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Months passed, and Lucas's life took on a new rhythm, one filled with purpose and pride. He continued sharing his story, growing more confident with each event. His bond with Milo deepened, and his relationship with Ethan became stronger than ever. Together, they had weathered a storm and come out stronger. But life had one more surprise in store. One afternoon, while Lucas was walking Milo, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered to hear a familiar voice. It was Detective Harris. "Lucas," Harris said, his tone lighter than usual. "I wanted to let you know Derek was sentenced today." Lucas stopped in his tracks. "What happened?" 3 years, Harris replied. "For everything, the intimidation, the theft, and resisting arrest. Justice was served, and it was thanks to you." Lucas's chest tightened, a mix of relief and satisfaction washing over him. "Thank you for letting me know," he said quietly. "You deserved to know," Harris said, "and for what it's worth. Lucas, you handled all of this with courage. You should be proud." After hanging up, Lucas crouched down to hug Milo. "We did it, boy," he whispered. "It's finally over." The news felt like a closing chapter. But Lucas knew his story wasn't over. Inspired by the journey he'd been through, he decided to start a blog where he could share not just his story but also advice for others facing challenges. He called it Milo's Courage, dedicating it to his loyal companion. The blog quickly gained traction. People from all walks of life reached out to share their own stories. Thanking Lucas for his words and encouragement, he realized his voice was making a real difference. One evening, Ethan planned a special dinner to celebrate everything Lucas had achieved. They invited neighbors and friends who had supported them throughout their journey. Milo, of course, was the guest of honor, wearing a little blue bandana that read, "Hero." During the meal, Ethan stood to make a toast. "To Lucas," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "You've shown all of us what it means to be brave. I'm proud to be your dad." The room erupted in cheers and clinking glasses. And Lucas felt his heart swell. He glanced down at Milo, who wagged his tail happily as if understanding every word. As the years passed, Lucas continued to grow. He graduated high school with honors and decided to pursue a degree in psychology. Inspired by his own experiences and a desire to help others, Milo remained his constant companion, joining him on campus and becoming a beloved presence among his classmates. Lucas's blog expanded into a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping kids build confidence and stand up to adversity. Ethan became a key supporter, helping Lucas manage the growing project. Looking back, Lucas marveled at how far they'd come. What started as a terrifying moment in his life had turned into a source of strength. Not just for him but for countless others. One crisp fall morning, Lucas stood at the edge of a park, Milo by his side. The leaves crunched underfoot as he threw a stick for his loyal friend to chase. The sunlight streamed through the trees, casting a warm glow over everything. Ethan approached from a nearby bench, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Lucas and sat down beside him. "You've come a long way, kid," Ethan said, his voice full of pride. Lucas smiled, watching Milo race back with the stick. "We've come a long way," he corrected. Ethan nodded, clinking his coffee cup against Lucas's S. "To the future." As Lucas watched Milo happily roll in the leaves, he felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been hard, but it had shaped him into someone stronger, braver, and more resilient than he'd ever imagined. And with Milo and Ethan by his side, he knew the future held nothing he couldn't face.